Have you ever sat in the quiet of the night, perhaps after a long day of feeling like you missed the mark, and wondered if the life you have actually lived is enough for God? Not the life you plan to live, not the version of yourself that was more disciplined, more faithful, or more successful, but the messy, complicated, and often disappointing life that has actually unfolded. Is that life enough? Most people walk through their entire lives carrying a heavy, invisible weight of inadequacy, believing that they are somehow second class in the kingdom of heaven because their journey hasn't been a straight line of perfection. But today, I want to share with you something that will completely transform how you view your standing before the Almighty. There are 7 profound things that happen when we understand what God truly thinks of the life you have actually lived. And the 5th one is the one that 95% of people do not understand, yet it is the very thing that can set your soul free from the prison of not enough. We are going to dive deep into a sacred moment in history, a moment just weeks before the prophet Joseph Smith's life was taken, when he stood before thousands in the wind of Nauvoo and pulled back the curtain on the nature of God and the human soul. This was the King Follett Discourse, delivered in April 1844, and within its words lies the key to answering the existential question that haunts us all. Is my actual life enough? Notice the weight of that question. It isn't asking about your potential. It is asking about your reality. This isn't just a theological discussion. It is a lifeline for anyone who has ever felt like they are running out of time or that they have wasted too much of the time they were given. Did you see that? The fear isn't just that we aren't perfect. It's the fear that our imperfections have permanently disqualified us from the best parts of eternity. But what if I told you that the very things you see as your failures are seen by God as the essential materials of your exaltation? We often look at our lives like a construction site that never got finished, but God looks at the same site and sees a masterwork in progress. As we look at these 7 revelations, I want you to ask yourself, how does this affect me today? How would my life change tomorrow if I truly believed I was already accepted in the Beloved? Before we move into the first revelation, I want to promise you that if you stay until the end, you will never look at your imperfect history the same way again. This is not about lowering the bar. It is about understanding who set the bar and why he did it in the first place. This is the doctrine of enough. To begin understanding this, we have to go back to a cold, windy afternoon in April 1844. Joseph Smith stood on a wooden platform, his voice fighting against the elements, addressing a congregation that had just lost a beloved friend named King Follett. King Follett had been killed in a construction accident, and the community was grieving. They were asking the same questions you are. What happens to the soul? Is the life he lived sufficient? Joseph knew his own time was short. He would be dead in less than 3 months. This wasn't a time for superficial platitudes. This was a time for the meat of the kingdom. It is in this context that the first revelation appears. The truth that your spirit is co-eternal with God. This is in the King Follett Discourse, where Joseph famously taught that the mind or the intelligence which man possesses is co-equal with God himself. Let's understand what this means for you right now. If your spirit has existed from all eternity, then the 70 or 80 years you spend on this earth are not the final exam of your entire existence. They are a single chapter in an infinite book. Most people think that this life is the only chance we have to become something, and if we don't hit the mark by age 80, we have failed. But Joseph taught that we are on a ladder of progression that extends far beyond the veil. He said, "It is not all to be comprehended in this world. It will be a great work to learn our salvation and exaltation even beyond the grave. Consider the story of a man I once met named Thomas. Thomas was 75 years old and had spent most of his life away from the faith he was raised in. He had made many mistakes, broken relationships, years of addiction, a trail of regrets. He felt that he had used up his life and that it was too late to be enough. But when he understood this first revelation, that his spirit was eternal and that this mortal life was a preparation, not the final destination, everything changed. He realized that the actual life he lived, with all its scars, was the exact curriculum his eternal spirit needed to learn humility and the need for a savior. It wasn't about the time lost. It was about the wisdom gained. How does this affect you today? First, you can stop panicking about the lost years. Second, you can realize that God isn't surprised by the time it's taking you to learn. Third, You can begin to see yourself as an eternal being who is currently in school, and students are expected to make mistakes. Notice that when you remove the ticking clock of mortality, the pressure to be already finished disappears. This is the first step in the doctrine of enough. Now we move into the second revelation, which addresses the latecomers and the slow learners. This is the historical anchor of the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, found in Matthew chapter 20, which Joseph Smith frequently referenced in his private teachings and public discourses. In this parable, a householder hires laborers at different times of the day, some at 6 a.m., some at noon, and some at 5 p.m., just an hour before the workday ends. When it comes time to pay them, he gives everyone the exact same wage, 1 penny. The people who worked all day were furious. They thought, "We did more, so we should get more." But the householder's response is the heartbeat of the doctrine of enough. He says, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good?" This is the great equalizer, the covenant. Joseph Smith taught that those who enter the covenant, whether they enter early or late, become heirs to the entire kingdom. Notice something important here. The reward was not based on the amount of work, but on the fact of the work. If you are in the vineyard at the end of the day, you get the penny. This is a truth that 95% of people struggle with because we are conditioned by a world that pays by the hour. We think God has a punch clock, and we are worried we didn't clock in early enough. But in the King Follett Discourse, Joseph emphasizes that God's thoughts are not our thoughts. God is looking for the moment of turning. He is looking for the covenant relationship. This is in the scriptures, and it is confirmed by the words of the prophets. The covenant is the equalizer. I remember a woman named Sarah who felt like a second-class disciple because she didn't serve a mission or marry in the temple when she was young. She came back to her faith in her 50s after a long detour. She felt like she was the 5 p.m. laborer. She told me, "I'll never have the same standing as those who were faithful their whole lives." But when we read Matthew 20 together, she saw it. The penny is the same. The exaltation is the same. The love is the same. God does not have a discounted heaven for those who came late. Your actual life, even the part where you were outside the vineyard, was part of the process that led you back to the gate. How do you prepare today? First, stop comparing your start date to someone else's. Second, focus on the fact that you are in the vineyard now. Third, realize that the master of the vineyard is more interested in being generous than he is in being fair by human standards. This brings us to the third revelation, which is the sheer reach of the atonement of Jesus Christ. Many people believe the atonement is a safety net for when we fall, but Joseph Smith taught in the King Follett Discourse that it is much more. It is the very power that allows us to eventually become like God. He said, "You have got to learn how to be gods yourselves, by going from one small degree to another, and from a small capacity to a great one, from grace to grace." Notice the phrasing, from grace to grace. This means that you don't just use grace to get back to zero, you use grace to go from level to level. This is the truth that changes everything. Your actual life is the series of small degrees Joseph was talking about. Every time you repented, every time you tried again, every time you chose kindness when you were tired, that was you going from grace to grace. It's not about the big moments. It's about the small capacity being expanded. But here is the part that many miss. The expansion only happens because of the friction of your actual life. You couldn't learn patience in a world where everything went your way. You couldn't learn mercy in a world where you never needed it yourself. Before we move to the fourth revelation, which is about the math of heaven, I want to ask you a favor. If this message is speaking to a part of your soul that has felt not enough, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. By doing so, you help the algorithm find other people who are sitting in that same quiet room tonight, wondering if their lives matter. When you share this, you are telling someone else that their actual life is enough in the sight of God. Now, the fourth revelation involves the math of heaven. In our world, 1 + 1 always equals 2. But in the economy of God, the widow's mite is more than the rich man's gold. Why? Because God measures the percentage of heart, not the gross amount of work. In the King Follett Discourse, Joseph taught that God judges us by the intent of the heart. This is a concept that 95% of people acknowledge but few truly feel. If you have a capacity of 10 today and you give 9, you are doing better than someone who has a capacity of 100 and gives 50. Your actual life might look small compared to a world-famous humanitarian, but if you are giving your 9 out of 10, God views you as a giant. This is found in the teachings of Joseph, where he says God sets his heart on those who seek him, regardless of their status. I think of a single mother who is so exhausted she can barely whisper a prayer at night. She feels like she is failing God because she isn't doing great things. But God sees her actual life, the wiping of tears, the sacrifice of her own needs, and he sees her giving 100% of her current capacity. To him, that is not just enough. It is magnificent. How does this affect you today? First, audit your heart, not your schedule. Second, ask God what he thinks of your effort, not what your neighbor thinks. Third, celebrate the small victories of character over the large victories of status. Now we arrive at the fifth revelation, the one I told you 95% of people don't understand. It is the concept that your unlived life, the life you think you should have had, is an idol that keeps you from the God of your actual life. We often worship the version of ourselves that never made mistakes. We say, God would love that version of me, but that version of you doesn't exist. It is a ghost. In the King Follett Discourse, Joseph Smith reveals a God who is intimately involved in the reality of human existence. He says, God himself, finding he was in the midst of spirits and glory, because he was more intelligent, saw proper to institute laws whereby the rest could have a privilege to advance like himself. Notice God met us in the midst of where we were. He didn't wait for us to become ghosts of perfection. He loves the you that is currently struggling because that is the only you there is. The 95% of people who don't understand this spend their lives trying to fix their past so they can finally be worthy of God's love in the present. But here is the truth. God's love is not at the finish line. It is on the track. This is the fifth truth. God is the God of the actual, not the God of the ideal. When you stop comparing your life to the ideal life you didn't live, you suddenly find that God has been standing in your actual life all along, waiting for you to notice him. This is the moment when enough becomes a reality. It's not that you have reached perfection. It's that you have reached acceptance. Let's look at the sixth revelation, the ladder of progression. Joseph Smith used the metaphor of a ladder in his final address. He said, when you climb up a ladder, you must begin at the bottom and ascend step by step until you arrive at the top. And so it is with the principles of the gospel. You must begin with the first and go on until you learn all the principles of exaltation. But it will be a great while after you have passed through the veil before you will have learned them. Did you see that? A great while after you have passed through the veil. This is a direct rebuke to anyone who feels like they have to have it all together before they die. Your actual life is just the first few rungs of the ladder. If you are on the ladder, you are enough. The direction you are facing matters infinitely more than the rung you are standing on. Most people think God only loves the people at the top of the ladder. But Joseph's teaching suggests that God is the one holding the ladder at the bottom. He is just as invested in the person on rung 1 as he is in the person on rung 100. I met a brother named David who was devastated because he didn't start living right until his 60s. He felt he had missed the chance to climb the ladder. But when we discussed this step-by-step doctrine from the King Follett Discourse, he realized that he wasn't behind. He was exactly where he was, and the next step was all that mattered. How does this affect you today? First, identify your current rung and stop looking at the top. Second, realize that progression is a long-term game that doesn't end at death. Third, find joy in the step you are taking today, however small it may be. That is the sixth truth. Now, the seventh and final revelation, the final measure. What is the one thing God will look at when he evaluates the life you have actually lived? Joseph Smith's entire ministry pointed to this. It is your relationship with Jesus Christ and your willingness to keep trying. In his teachings, Joseph emphasized that the atonement was not just a one-time event, but a continuous reach. The actual life you lived is enough because Jesus Christ makes up the difference. But here's the twist. He doesn't just fill the gap at the end. He is the gap. He is the bridge that turns your not enough into more than enough. The final measure isn't a checklist of deeds. It is the scars on your soul that match the scars on his hands. It is the fact that you didn't give up on him because he never gave up on you. This is the essence of the King Follett Discourse. Understanding the character of God. Joseph said, "If men do not comprehend the character of God, they do not comprehend themselves." If you think God is a harsh taskmaster, you will never feel like your life is enough. But if you comprehend him as a loving father who instituted laws whereby the rest could have a privilege to advance like himself, you realize that the whole system is rigged in your favor. The universe is designed for your success, not your failure. Now, how do we apply this? How do we live the doctrine of enough starting tomorrow morning? I want to give you 3 specific action points. First, take 10 minutes to write down the ghost version of your life, the one you think you should have lived. Then, literally or figuratively, burn that paper. Give yourself permission to stop mourning the life that didn't happen so you can start living the one that is happening. Second, identify one small degree of progression you can focus on this week. Don't try to change your whole life. Just change one rung on your ladder. Is it being more patient with your spouse? Is it 5 minutes of sincere prayer? Whatever it is, do it with the knowledge that it is enough for today. Third, whenever you feel the weight of inadequacy, repeat the phrase, "God is the God of my actual life." Remind yourself that he is not waiting for the perfect you to show up. He is already there, in the middle of your mess, in the midst of spirits and glory. Let's recap what we have learned today. We started with the realization that your spirit is co-eternal with God, meaning this life is just a chapter, not the whole book. We looked at the parable of the laborers and saw that the covenant is the equalizer. It doesn't matter when you start, as long as you are there. We explored the reach of the atonement and how we go from grace to grace. We learned the math of heaven, that God measures heart and capacity, not gross output. We uncovered the 5th truth, that the unlived life is an idol and God loves the actual you. We saw the ladder of progression and realized that being on the ladder is what matters, not how high you are. And finally, we understood that the final measure is our relationship with Christ, who makes our actual life more than enough. This is the transformative power of the King Follett Discourse and the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. It shifts the focus from our performance to God's character. It takes the burden of perfection now and replaces it with progression forever. This brings deep comfort to the soul. It allows you to breathe. It allows you to look in the mirror and, despite the wrinkles and the regrets and the what-ifs, say with confidence, "I am a work in progress, and my progress is enough for my Father." This is not a license to stop trying. It is the fuel to keep going. When you know you are accepted, you don't stop working, you stop working for the wrong reasons. You stop working out of fear and start working out of love. You stop trying to earn a place in heaven and start trying to bring a little bit of heaven into your actual life. Did you see the difference? One is a burden. The other is a blessing. As we close this discussion, I want to invite you to do one more thing. Share this video with one person you know who is struggling with feelings of inadequacy. We all have that friend or family member who is their own harshest critic. Be the voice that reminds them that their actual life is sacred. The doctrine of enough is not just for you. It is for all of us who are trying to find our way home in the dark. Joseph Smith's final weeks were spent trying to make sure we understood this. That God is more merciful than we can imagine, and that our souls are more magnificent than we can comprehend. You are an eternal being, having a mortal experience, and the Father of your spirit is pleased with your effort. He sees the you that is trying. He sees the you that is weary. And he says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Not because you were perfect, but because you were faithful to the journey. That is the truth. That is the doctrine. And that is why you are and always will be enough in his sight. Go forward today with your head held high, not because of what you have done, but because of whose you are and what he is making of you. The ladder is there, the master is holding it, and the next step is yours to take. This is the promise of the King Follett Discourse, and it is the promise of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Your life, the one you are living right now, is the very place where heaven is meeting earth. Embrace it, live it, and know that it is enough.